Evolution: The Beginning. This is a game that I picked up at Target a couple of weeks ago. They had a sale, sort of like buy two, get three sort of thing. And I picked it up even though I didn't know much about it. I figured out it probably was the family slash children-friendly version of the Evolution game that I've seen around. I've seen players playing it. I saw it played at Gen Con. I myself haven't played it, so I thought, well, I don't know the main game, but this could be the right place to begin. And so I picked up the game and I played it with my daughter Amelia. We have enjoyed it very much, I can already tell you that. In this game you play the role of, I don't know that it really is the role of groups of species. You play the role of natural selection, forces of natural selection. In any case, whatever you are in the game, whatever entity you are, you will have groups of animals, various species. You will evolve them by giving them different traits, and you will be fighting for resources in a very limited, in an environment of very limited resources, where you can eat some vegetables, you can eat other animals, and you need to keep evolving to either get away from carnivores or to remain an effective carnivore. Here we have a tile that represents the watering hole. You place it in the middle of the table or the play area at the beginning. Here you have a nice pool of food tokens, different art on various tokens, but they all are functionally the same. At the beginning of each turn, there will be 2 new food tokens that go on the watering hole and represent things that the herbivores can eat. Speaking of evolution and animals, let me introduce you to the new member of the Arnaudo family. Fuzzball, Obi-Wan, Arnaudo, new cat we got a couple of weeks ago. It used to be a stray cat. The shelter cleaned him up and, well, now is here with us. And let's hope he doesn't try to eat any of these things, any of the components here. Just be good, Obi-Wan, be good. Now, each player, each turn, will receive a card that will become a new species. These cards are really smartly done. On one side, they have different effects and traits that your animals can acquire, and the other side, they represent the species and or population. Meaning, if you place a card in front of you by itself in your play area, it represents a new species. If you add cards to a previous stack, now you're adding population to that. Oh, Fuzzball. Population to that species. Like right now I had 2 species, one has a population of 3 and one has a population of 1. At the beginning of each turn, of each of your turns, you get a new species from the deck, and then you get the 3 cards into your hand. Then, again, you place also 2 resources here. Then it is time for you to play your cards. What you can do is you can use your cards as new species or as extra population, or you can use them as traits that you're giving to your animals. Maybe now your animals have acquired a long neck. Oh my gosh, so many long necks here. Or they have acquired other traits such as defensive horns, they become carnivores, nocturnals, fertiles, they may learn to fly, they may have speed, lots of interesting things. I like how by putting together different traits on a certain species, you will be making Fuzzball. Don't, I know you want to play, but come on. For example, you'll be, if you had flight and nocturnal, like you made owls. How cool is that? If you make carnivores and fast carnivores, well, I guess you can figure out whatever, you can choose whatever other animal, monster you made. After you have played your cards, you don't have to play them all. I love that the cat thinks I'm playing with him and not filming a video review. After you played cards to make new species, add 2 species, it is time to feed your animals. Now, if they are not carnivores, they can feed from the watering hole, and so you can simply take those markers and put them there. As you probably have figured out, you need to place a token on each population symbol on your cards, otherwise they will starve and you will lose population. Carnivores, they can eat other species, and they have to keep trying eating as long as there are cards, species, population cards that they can legally eat. that means that probably you will want to give precedence to other people's animals, but if there aren't any available, then you have to cannibalize your own. What happens when a carnivore attacks another population? The carnivore needs to pretty much meet the defenses of that population. For example, here I have a species of animals. Their only trait is a fly. They are not carnivores, so they are herbivores. And I have that carnivore, which is nocturnal but can't fly. So too bad for you, carnivore. But suppose that I had given them the flight trait, and each species can have up to 3 traits. Now that carnivore species will be able to eat this guy here. For each population card that they eat, the carnivores generate 2 food tokens, and suppose that at the end, after I've eaten all that was legal, that was able to fly after, to ambush at night, to catch down a hole where they were hiding, I've been able to outrun with my speed, after I've been able to eat all that I could. If I still have some population cards that have not been fed, they are removed and discarded. After the feeding phase, I take all of the food tokens that I was able to produce and assign, and I put them in my nice little elegant baggie. Each player has one of these baggies. The art is influential in game terms, but boy, does it look good. These bags are really nice. And so I put the food tokens that I was able to produce and assign, and I put them in my baggie, and that's it. And that's pretty important. I collect them in here because these food tokens count as victory points at the end of the game. You also have a nice player aid here that indicates the various traits. Remember, you can use some of these traits to run away from other people, and that a carnivore needs to have the same one. You also have other abilities. For example, you get food tokens when a carnivore feeds. If you have the scavenger trait, you can store extra food, you can gain extra population, you can get extra food because you have a long neck. So that sort of stuff. You continue like this until the end of the game, which is when the main deck is depleted, and at that point the player with the highest total is the winner of the game. That player has reached the peak of evolution, although seeing things from where I stand, from where I sit, I believe that this guy here has reached the peak of evolution. Haven't you? Haven't you? Evolution the Beginning, really nice game, especially to play with kids, as a fun, entertaining way to teach them about adaptation, about natural selection, competition for limited resources. So definitely a good game for families, a good game to play with kids, as long as they're kids that don't mind getting eaten from time to time. Yeah, not every kid enjoys that competitive element, and this is very competitive when players are quite literally eating away the resources of the opponent. The opponent created a nice cute species and they get devoured in a turn that can feel harsh. The cold harshness of nature is well captured in this game. On the other hand, probably you're not gonna play with a 4 or 5-year-old, so by the time you play the game with your kids, they should have more of a emotional, stable foundation to be able to handle that, and then to deliver the same level of of harsh carnivore love on the opponent. Here the box says ages 8 and up. I play with my daughter Amelia, who is 6, so definitely, like it so often happens on these indications on the boxes, the indication is conservative. It can be played, the game can definitely be played with younger kids than that. But again, you have to find the right balance, not too young that the player starts crying when you eat their most cherished species. This being said, it's a good game. It really feels didactic without feeling pedantic. It really feels like, wow, even I then have passing knowledge of adaptation and natural selection. I can see how there are certain mechanics here that can be seen as didactic, that show these natural mechanics at work. As you go one way, you specialize, which is awesome, then you do one thing very well, but then you're missing the opportunity of collecting other resources. Then you remain generic, and then you're exposed to other types of danger. You're good at doing one thing, which can be great if the people are specializing in different things, and then that resource that you know how to exploit is less open for competition. There are all these elements of how the traits of nature interact with one another, how you take from somewhere, then you add somewhere, you're taking from something else. Everything that you create will require something else to perish or to be transformed so that that thing can exist. It's the big circle of life. It's much better than the Lion King, I believe, to explain the idea of the big circle of life. So again, as a didactic game, I would totally recommend it to like teachers that want to introduce these concepts to students. But if you're just looking for a game, or you're just looking for a game, I don't know if this is a good game, I find it that also as a family game, didactic advantages aside, it's enjoyable. It's very enjoyable. It's not super deep, and it has an element of luck that sometimes can be part of the experience. If the opponent has a lot of carnivores and the opponent has learned the trick of eating your people first and their people next, and you only have herbivores, then you can find yourself in an unpleasant situation, because there is only so much, the amount of resources that the herbivores can eat each turn is limited. So that means that, well, unless you get the long necks and other stuff like that, if you're just feeding from the watering hole, you simply cannot create a large population, and you have a small population and the carnivores keep hitting it. I would say that if it gets to a point where you have a small population of herbivores and an opponent has a large population of carnivores, it can be hard for you to come back. This may also be a function of the fact that they played it with 2 players only. With more players, I can imagine how then we have ganging up against the leader. Why do you keep eating me when I'm not a threat anyway? Start eating their animals. Well, maybe I get a chance of coming back. Also, because of that, as the carnivores are eating each other and each player's turn, your resources are added to the watering hole. With more than 2 players, I see how there will be more resources there for the herbivores, so that option would be a little more viable. It seemed to me that with 2 players, so the carnivores had a slight advantage, and maybe it can be fixed by simply increasing the number of resources that are placed on the watering hole every turn with 2 players, so that again the herbivores do not fall behind the curve against a carnivore-based team, if team is the right word. But actually, I really like the fact that you're not really playing anybody specific. You're playing sort of like general entity. You control and you direct various species. I like the fact that every species is useful. No one is a king, no one is bound to last. You shouldn't get attached to anybody, and for the overall health of the ecosystem, from time to time it's good for a species to disappear so that others can thrive. There is a certain, I don't know if it's a poetic element to it, but I would say the overall feel of how the mechanics portray the theme, on top of feeling again didactically interesting, there's a certain beauty in this idea of, yes, the big circle of life, species coming and going, interacting with one another, outsmarting each other until one of them gets an advantage, but that one in turn there will be poetic justice, because that one sooner or later will become somebody else's dinner or will be forced to perish because he specialized too much. The interaction of all the elements of the design makes for a nice game, a didactic one, as I said. Again, a ludically interesting game in terms of gameplay, and I just like the feel. The feel of the game has a certain, again, sense of poetic, fatalistic justice to it. In any case, I definitely enjoyed this game. I recommend it to anybody who has kids and wants to introduce them to this topic, scientifically speaking, or just as a simple light game to play with your kids. This is one that is fun. Again, you need the right kids that don't mind when you eat their animals, and you don't mind, and kids that learn not to be too attached to their own species, because then a player becomes really powerful and the player realizes when it's the right time to cannibalize their own species. And again, we get some players, sometimes they're so attached to their own thing that that idea seems preposterous to them. So there are these elements that do not necessarily always play well in the mind of very young players, but definitely will not become a problem for adult players, for most families. So as a family game, as also even a game just to play among adults, as a light game, as a light filler, then I think there could be some interesting, there's some interesting mean humor going on, because then what that evolution that becomes, that is such a didactic, interesting element when you play with kids, becomes a take that element, becomes a backstabbing, cutthroating element. Then you have this confrontation in which maybe your animals are enjoying eating their opponents a little too much, not in a way that is biologically accurate, but it's gonna be fun to eat your friends. And then when you play with adults, I believe that the flavor, the atmosphere surrounding the game, the social element of the game will change entirely. And I think it can be fun with the right players that, again, don't mean a little bit or a lot of take that element. Evolution, the beginning, played with kids, played with your family, play with adult friends that don't mind a little bit of take that here and that and there. But it's definitely a simple game, yes, but definitely a solid one. I was impressed by how the mechanics and the theme went well together in a game that is basically so simple. There's definitely a certain elegance to the design, and definitely now I'm curious about the main game, and I think I'll try it at some point, and then I'll let you know what I think about Evolution, the main game. The beginning is good and promising.